Hi everybody, welcome to Christian Homestead. My name is Jared. So within this last week, we saw the appointment of a new apostle, Elder Clark G. Gilbert, and I was really excited about this. I know a lot of you were. We noted the unusual aurora that took place exactly between the passing of President Holland and the ordination date of Elder Gilbert, just like the other aurora on November 11th that was exactly between the passing of President Nelson and President Holland. But as I was looking through the news, of course, Salt Lake Tribune had something negative to say about it, which I was kind of surprised, but of course, not surprised. They have this article, LDS Church President Dallin Oaks makes a controversial pick for new apostle, Clark Gilbert. And then underneath that it says, quote, Clark Gilbert may be the most consequential apostolic appointment in the modern church, historian says. And so I don't know, I didn't know much about Elder Clark G. Gilbert before this point. I didn't know that there was any controversy, but we'll get into it. And it's interesting because it seems that there's like this connection in this story and connection between Elder Gilbert and President Holland and BYU. And it goes all the way back to the beginning of my channel. I'll show you what I mean in just a minute. All right, so at this part of the article, it says, Gilbert, the faith's commissioner of education, has gained a reputation as a culture warrior, eager to defend and define orthodoxy while combating the rise of secularism, especially at church-owned schools. Oh my, I can't believe that he would do that. He fills the seat left vacant by the December death of another educator, Apostle Jeffrey R. Holland. Now, really quick, like I said, it's so interesting because this was one of the first things that I covered when I started this channel back in August of 2021. I actually made a few videos about, at the time, Elder Holland speaking at BYU, and he gave a really powerful talk. And it was kind of a warning to essentially faculty and staff at BYU that things need to change. A lot of people were upset about it, but I made these 3 videos. This was back in the day when I was recording videos outside on the homestead. Here's 2 of my calves that I was raising at the time, and all of our chickens and ducks, and there's our goose and cows back there. And so I'll put the links for these in the description box below in case you're interested, if you want to blast from the past and to see what I said back then. But yeah, we're gonna cover some of that talk because this goes hand in hand with Elder Clark G. Gilbert, because at the time that this was given, it was the same year that that Elder Clark G. Gilbert was. It says here, he has served as a general authority 70 since April 2021 and as education commissioner since August 2021. So August 2021, that's when President Holland, at the time Elder Holland, gave this address on August 23rd, 2021. And it came at a time when you had this kind of nonsense going on at BYU. This is ABC4 Utah. Students at BYU hold demonstration against school's honor code. University responds. This is from April 2019. There was also this. March 5th, 2020. You had this protesting going on in downtown Salt Lake at church headquarters, BYU students with rainbow flags. And then, just a few days later, there was the earthquake that caused the Angel Moroni of the Salt Lake Temple to drop his trumpet. At a time when the pandemic was entering the United States, and shortly after, missionary work took a hit, missionaries came home, and then temples worldwide were closed. I do believe that it's connected, and I feel like this was a warning. And it's funny because just recently, in case you didn't catch it, I did a live stream and a video talking about the fact that this recent earthquake that struck near Magna in West Valley City, that's the same location as this earthquake in 2020. And I haven't checked if there's been any updates on that, but the article that we read from, also from Salt Lake Tribune, the University of Utah was saying that it was potentially an aftershock from the 2020 earthquake. which I guess aftershocks can come 6 years later. I didn't know that until just recently. But anyway, then you got this. You have the Y that's up on the mountain, Y for BYU. And there were activists or students that went up there and, turned it to these rainbow colors, as reported by Fox 13 News Utah. This was March 5th, 2021. So this was the lead up to Elder Holland going to BYU and speaking. And then shortly after he spoke, which caused a controversy, you had David Archuleta, who was a member of the church. My understanding is that he has stepped away from the church. But just a few days later, he came out as LGBTQ+. And it seems like he did this media tour. Here we have him on Yahoo Entertainment, and then USA Today, and then Dr. Mayim Bialik podcast. And he may have gone to other places too. And it's just interesting timing for him to decide to do that. I don't know. I don't know what it's like once you reach that status, but I feel like there probably is pressure from larger forces that may have prompted him to do that. When I say larger forces, I'm talking about people in power, people that would be like, hey, you should do this now because someone from your church just, essentially threatened BYU professors, during this opening address. And so we need to respond. I feel like that's what happened, but I can't verify that. But it's just interesting timing for him to have done that. By the way, he's also from Murray, my hometown. Okay, so back to the Salt Lake Tribune article. Later on, it says, as overseer of BYU, critics say Gilbert implemented strict policies to weed out faculty members who didn't support a certain approach to Latter-day Saints scriptures, practices, and orthodoxy. Well, thank goodness. What are you doing at BYU if you don't support the church? And of course, they would say, well, this is our approach. No. We're not like other churches. We're not like other Christian churches where you just pick up the Bible, the Book of Mormon, whatever, and then you interpret it your way to fit your politics. This is a centralized church, and we have a prophet who receives revelation from the Lord. And this whole thing started with God the Father and Jesus Christ coming to the prophet Joseph Smith and telling him and guiding him to restore the church. So it's not just men trying to figure things out and the best way that we should live. And, I think the scriptures say this. No, there are definite interpretations to scripture, and we have a definite doctrine. It's not something that's up for, it's not put against the popular opinion or the philosophies of men. It is what it is. That's how our church is. So if you're against the church and you don't believe the orthodoxy, quote unquote, that's one of the key words in this video, by the way, orthodoxy, then what are you doing teaching at BYU? It's a church school. What are you doing? Like, obviously you're working, but it's kind of weird that you would work somewhere that goes against your values. And for a lot of these people that have these kind of values, that's their real religion. Their politics and their social views is their first religion. And it's like the church is just a costume for them. It's just a social club. It's just, this is my culture. But my real religion, the things that I actually believe in and that I'm excited about and passionate about and that I hold dear to me, it's this side of politics. That's my actual religion. Okay, continuing. Particularly on women, families, and LGBTQ plus issues. That led to widespread feelings of fear and anxiety, a number of professors told the Salt Lake Tribune last year. Quote, Clark Gilbert may be the most consequential apostolic appointment in the modern church, Latter-day Saint historian Benjamin Park said Thursday. Continuing, he said, as manager of the Deseret News, president of BYU Idaho, and commissioner of education, his most common refrain has been to double down on fundamental principles to avoid modern encroachments and reaffirm exceptionalism claims. I don't know what side Benjamin Park is on this. The way that he's like saying this, it kind of sounds like he's against Elder Clark G. Gilbert and the orthodox, quote unquote, values of the church. This whole thing with avoid modern encroachments, that frames it in such a way as though, oh yeah, this, the tradition of your fathers, it's old fashioned. He wants to be that part of the church that doesn't want to modernize and progress, right? Because it's all about progress and being progressive. And then I'm particularly troubled by this phrase right here, exceptionalism claims. I can only assume that what Benjamin Park is referring to is the fact that we claim to be the one true church, which is absolutely true. And framing it like this, exceptionalism claims, reminds me a lot of Matthew chapter 4. Let's just read it. Then was Jesus led up of the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted of the devil. And when he had fasted 40 days and 40 nights, he was afterward and hungered. And when the tempter came to him, he said, If thou be the Son of God, command that these stones be made bread. So, it's the devious if. It's trying to get Christ to doubt his divinity and his mission. It's introducing doubt. And that's exactly what happened right here. Exceptionalism claims. Ugh, I really don't like that. Okay, in his public addresses, Gilbert has frequently, quote, critiqued modern institutions for losing their spiritual core and giving in to secularism. Yeah, it sounds about right. He has developed a widespread reputation among BYU system faculty for his conservative beliefs, distrust of contemporary academia, and eagerness to exert an intervening hand. I actually really appreciate this Salt Lake Tribune article in the words of Benjamin Park, because this makes me like him even more. He is definitely the right man for the job. And now I can see why the Lord inspired President Oaks to call him, because that's how it works. The apostles, the prophets, general authorities, you and I, with whatever we do in the church, this was all planned in the premortal life. It's foreordained. Christ already knew and had already chosen Elder Clark G. Gilbert to be an apostle at this time. So it's not President Oaks' choice or him using his own wisdom. Although, I always say we are expected to work through problems and think of solutions, but then we take it to the Lord, and ultimately it's the Lord that inspires us and provides that revelation with what we should do with really important things like this. All right, continuing. Perhaps not since the appointment of conservatives J. Reuben Clark or Ezra Taft Benson, the historian said, quote, has someone joined the Quorum of the 12 with such a prominent record for speaking out on culture war issues and charting out a position of retrenchment, end quote. Indeed, said a current BYU professor who asked not to be named for fear of reprisal from the school, quote, there is lots of shock and despair as faculty reached out to one another upon hearing the news. What? Are you kidding me? Again, who is this person? You don't need to hunt them down. But who is this person? There's lots of shock and despair. This is probably a professor that should not be working at BYU. And again, what are you doing? Do you know what BYU is? Continuing, for his part, Gilbert has warned that secular agendas are striving to thwart the spiritual progression of faith-driven organizations. Yeah, just like this article, just like this media tour over here, just like a lot of things, all this opposition for someone who wants the church to remain what it is and to actually live by its doctrine and not water everything down and reinterpret everything and conform to modern political philosophies. Such a crazy idea that he would actually believe in what he believes in. All right, continuing. Emily Jensen, web editor for Dialogue, a journal of Mormon thought. Oh, there's so much I could say about them. Worries, however, about the status of women given Gilbert's hiring record at BYU. Quote, women who would be up for a position would not get that position, and it seemed to stop at him. We do not know exactly why or how hiring decisions were made, but it seemed like he was the stopping point for a lot of women obtaining positions of authority in church education. Yeah, because for people like this, it's always about power and authority. Reducing the differences between genders to power and authority and fame and money and etc. And that's disappointing because we have a prophet who seems interested in discussing how women use their authority within the church. Well, let me inform you of something. It really isn't the prophet who makes this decision, like I just said. It's the Lord. The Lord chose Elder Clark G. Gilbert. If you're a member of the church, then you should understand that. And one thing that I've noticed is people in this camp, this like leftist camp, that think that they're the ones that are going to bring about change in the church by going to church headquarters and protesting with flags and picket signs. It's become very clear to me that they don't have a testimony in prophets, and they don't understand how the church works. They don't understand that everything comes through revelation, in that it's the Lord that guides his church. They think that it's just like any other large organization. There's just a bureaucracy, and you just have to pressure people, or you have to do things that you do things the way that you normally would in politics or in the corporate world, whatever. They don't really believe, the majority of them, I think, do not really believe in the concept of prophets. Okay. Jensen was also disappointed that Oakes didn't use this opportunity to appoint the faith's first Black apostle. Yeah, because it's all his choice. It doesn't have anything to do with Jesus Christ. Quote, there's some amazing Black members of the 70 who seemed ready to go into that position, and it did not happen. So again, this is their doctrine. These are the things that they care about, that are so important to them, more so than actual religion. This is their religion, and this is how they think. Okay, now it looks like Newsweek also did an article, Clark Gilbert Apostle Pick, oh my gosh, this title. Clark Gilbert Apostle Pick sparks LDS Church backlash. There's been some outcry online, especially in Reddit forums, where people are discussing his previous role as the church's education commissioner, critics say. Oh, by the way, going back to this with what was her name? What Emily Jensen said. I mean, I guess we can take your word for it that, there were all these women that should have been hired and given positions of authority, but he stopped them. I mean, I don't know. You can make that claim. I don't know if I believe you. I'd like to see some more evidence of that maybe, but okay. So let's go to this. Let's look what Newsweek found on Reddit forums. There's been some outcry online, especially in Reddit forums, where people are discussing his previous role as the church's education commissioner. Critics say he implemented strict policies at LDS-owned private universities, carried out intense oversight, and pushed out dissenting opinions. This appointment marks LDS President Dallin H. Oaks' second apostolic selection in 4 months. It draws focus because Gilbert has been a high-profile defender of doctrinal orthodoxy. I know, that's just terrible. I can't believe it. The move could shape internal culture and policy for years because apostles hold lifetime roles that combine spiritual witness with significant administrative authority. Later on, several LDS Reddit threads show people voicing concerns about Gilbert's appointment, often citing a 2025 piece in the Salt Lake Tribune that reported on BYU staff who said Gilbert pushed a doctrine of obedience. Oh my gosh. He's pushing a doctrine of obedience? Kind of like when you get baptized and then you covenant to be obedient to the commandments. And then when you go to the temple, you make even more serious covenants to be obedient to the commandments. He's pushing a doctrine of obedience? Oh my goodness. Over personal choice. Oh, this is terrible. He's pushing a doctrine of obedience over personal choice. Because when we join this church, we follow our own way. We don't conform. We don't become disciples of Jesus Christ. We don't follow him. We don't follow his commandments. You make your own personal choices. And then if you have room, then you use this as a club for social purposes and whatever. Okay. Sowed an environment of distrust and negatively affected some students, especially women and members of the LGBTQ community. Music professor Jason Bergman said at the time that BYU was, quote, not safe anyone who doesn't fit the Orthodox mold. Yeah, I don't think that you should be a professor there if you don't fit the Orthodox mold. It's a church school. It's supposed to help defend the church and support our doctrine and our values. That's the whole point. Continuing, who told how he eventually left the university. Quote, I had LGBTQ students and saw how they suffered. I started to pay attention to how people of color and women were treated. What? What are you talking about? How are they treated? How were people of color treated? I'd like to know more about that. It was and continues to be hard for them. I can see like the women, if that other girl's claim is true, that they weren't given positions of authority, or if like things were unfair as far as employment opportunity goes. But aside from that, are you talking about abortion? Like, what are you talking about? A user called Otherwise7337 said about Gilbert's time at BYU, quote, he has tirelessly created an environment of fear among both students and faculty by punishing their livelihoods for holding dissenting opinions and tightening the vice of authority across the board. Well, I don't know. If you have dissenting opinions about doctrine, and how did it say up here? If you have personal choices that don't align with the doctrine of the church, and you're trying to work at a church school, maybe you should find somewhere else to work. How about that? And then we won't have this problem. This appointment by Oaks will serve to perpetuate strict enforcement of obedience to church practice and adherence to church ideology. Yeah, as though we're not already doing that with all the apostles in all the 70, as though this makes a big difference as far as that goes, church-wide. It's so silly. And why are we quoting just this anonymous person? In a different thread called Clark Gilbert, a user called extension-spite 4176 said, Gilbert seems to be another shining example of the worst Mormonism has to offer the world. Well, it's just he upholds our values and our doctrine. So from the church's point of view, it's good. You're basically just saying that you don't want the church to exist. And of course, because that's really what it's all about. I don't think I had anything else highlighted in this article. But let's go back to August 23rd, 2021. You can find this on speeches.byu.edu, the second half of the second century of Brigham Young University. At the time, Elder Jeffrey R. Holland. So everything that was just said about Elder Gilbert, it's not like he's the only one, or that he even started his crackdown on BYU. Look at what Elder Holland said. I'm pretty sure that Elder Gilbert was called at that time because those above him, like Elder Holland and the first presidency at the time, and whoever else is involved, wanted him there to do that job. As though he was just like going rogue and just doing whatever he wanted. No. Look at this. Okay, but imagine then the pain that comes with a memo like this one I recently received. These are just a half dozen lines from a 2-page document. You should know, the writer said, that some people in the extended community are feeling abandoned and betrayed by BYU. It seems that some professors, at least the vocal ones in the media, are supporting ideas that many of us feel are contradictory to gospel principles, making it appear to be about like any other university our sons and daughters could have attended. Several parents have said they no longer want to send their children here or donate to the school. Please don't think I'm opposed to people thinking differently about policies and ideas, the reader continued. I'm not. But I would hope that BYU professors would be bridging those gaps between faith and intellect and would be sending out students who are ready to do the same in loving, intelligent, and articulate ways. Yet I fear that some faculty are not supportive of the church's doctrines and policies and choose to criticize them openly or publicly. Yeah, no kidding. So I hope that, I don't know the state of BYU right now, but I hope that they have cleaned house. And if there's anyone still there that doesn't believe in the church, doesn't have a testimony, where politics is their religion, I hope that they leave. I hope that they're gone. Continuing, there are consequences to this. After having served a full-time mission and marrying her husband in the temple, a friend of mine recently left the church. In her graduation statement on a social media post, she credited such and such a BYU program and its faculty with the radicalizing of her attitudes and the destruction of her faith. Well, good job, BYU professors. And we know that there are wheat and tares, and the tares are among the wheat. Essentially, you have people that are under the influence of the adversary. And I think a lot of them know what they're doing. They want to be there because it's like, why are you part of a church that you despise so much? And I think some of them do it because they know exactly what they're doing. They're being rebellious. They're trying to tear it down. And this is an effective way to do it, is to masquerade as wheat and then start to sow seeds of doubt in philosophies of men mingled with scripture. Okay, continuing. Here's something I said on this subject 41 years ago, almost to the day. I was young, I was unprepared, I had been president for all but 3 weeks. I said then, and I say now, that if we are an extension of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, taking a significant amount of sacred tithes and other precious human resources, all of which might be expended in other worthy causes. So this is where, listen to this, this is where there's a warning, I think, that begins in this talk. A warning to professors and other adversaries of the church within BYU. So we're talking about tithing, which pays their salaries, precious human resources, all of which might be expended in other worthy causes. Surely our integrity demands that our lives be absolutely consistent with and characteristic of the restored gospel of Jesus Christ. At a university, there will always be healthy debate regarding a whole syllabus full of issues. But until we all come to the unity of the faith and have grown to the same measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ, our next best achievement will be to stay in harmony with the Lord's anointed. In other words, the prophet, as well as church leadership. BYU professors. Our next best achievement will be to stay in harmony with the Lord's anointed, those whom he has designated to declare church doctrine and to guide Brigham Young University as its trustees. In 2014, now think about this as though you're one of these BYU professors that are leading your students astray. You're teaching against the doctrine of the church. Your primary religion is your politics. think about listening to this from their point of view. Like you're thinking about your job, you're thinking about money that you need for your program, for, I don't know, research projects, or maybe new equipment for your lab or something. In 2014, 7 years ago, then Elder Russell M. Nelson came to campus for a BYU leadership meeting. His remarks were relatively brief, but tellingly, he said, quote, "With the church growing more rapidly in the less prosperous countries, we must conserve sacred funds more carefully than ever before. At BYU, we must ally ourselves even more closely with the work of our Heavenly Father. A college education for our people is a sacred responsibility, but it is not essential for eternal life." Think about that. He's saying, okay, money's getting a little bit tighter. We need to be wise with how we use money, and we have to have our focus on our Heavenly Father and His work. And although college education is very important, it's not essential. So think about that. If all these professors at BYU are becoming radicals and radicalizing their students, then maybe we don't need to do this. Or maybe some of you can just be let go. How about that? Continuing, a statement like that gets my attention, particularly because just a short time later, President Nelson started to chair our board of trustees, hold our purse strings, and have the final yay or nay on every proposal we might make, from a new research lab to more undergraduate study space to approving a new pickup truck for the physical facility staff. 3 years later, in 2017, Elder Dallin H. Oaks, not then but soon to be in the first presidency, where he would sit only one chair, one heartbeat away from the same position President Nelson now has, quoted our colleague Elder Neil A. Maxwell, who had said, quote, "In a way, Church of Jesus Christ scholars at BYU and elsewhere are a little bit like the builders of the temple in Nauvoo, who worked with a trowel in one hand and a musket in the other." Okay, so this phrase right here caused everybody to lose their minds, right? Because people of this frame of mind, they're usually against guns. And so they're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that you'd use that imagery. Oh my goodness. Today, scholars building the Temple of Learning must also pause on occasion to defend the kingdom. I personally think this is one of the reasons the Lord established and maintains this university. The dual role of builder and defender is unique and ongoing. I am grateful we have scholars today who can handle, as it were, both trowels and muskets. End quote. To this, Elder Oaks then challengingly responded, quote, "I would like to hear a little more musket fire from this Temple of Learning." And I love it, because now he's president of the church, and now he's called Elder Gilbert to be an apostle. I love it. He said this in a way that could have applied to a host of topics in various departments, but the one he specifically mentioned was the doctrine of the family and defending marriage as the union of a man and a woman. Little did he know that while many would hear his appeal, especially the School of Family Life, which moved quickly and visibly to assist, some others fired their muskets all right, but unfortunately, they didn't always aim at those hostile to the church. We thought a couple of stray rounds even went north of the point of the mountain. In case you're not familiar with Utah, I mean, the context is pretty clear, but you have BYU in Utah Valley, and as you head north, the mountains kind of come together to like a bottleneck, and it's called the point of the mountain. And so a stray round going north of the point of the mountain is basically toward church headquarters in Salt Lake. My beloved brothers and sisters, a house divided against itself cannot stand. And I will go to my grave pleading that this institution not only stands, but stands unquestionably committed in its unique academic mission and to the church that sponsors it. That is a fascinating statement because he just recently passed away. And the one who implemented this kind of crackdown and cleaning house, he's the one that is filling the vacancy left by President Holland. Back in August 2021, the same month that I started my channel, the same month that Elder Gilbert assumed this position, President Holland said, "And I will go to my grave pleading that this institution not only stands, but stands unquestionably committed to its unique academic mission and to the church that sponsors it." This almost feels prophetic in a way. Continuing, we hope it isn't a surprise to you that your trustees are not deaf or blind to the feelings that swirl around marriage and the whole same-sex topic on campus and a lot of other topics. I and many of my brethren have spent more time and shed more tears on this subject than we could ever adequately convey to you this morning or any morning. We have spent hours discussing what the doctrine of the church can and cannot provide the individuals and families struggling over this difficult issue. So it is with a little scar tissue of our own that we are trying to avoid, and we hope all will try to avoid, language, symbols, and situations that are more divisive than unifying, at the very time we want to show love for all of God's children. He's referring to the language, symbols, and situations that you see at these protests. Continuing, if a student commandeers a graduation podium intended to represent everyone getting diplomas that day in order to announce his personal sexual orientation, what might another speaker feel free to announce the next year? Until eventually anything goes. Now, I didn't pull it up, but it must have been that year. I kind of remember this. There was somebody, I think it was a female, she decided during her graduation speech to announce that she was whatever, LGBTQ plus, whatever it was. And I think she had a rainbow flag underneath her robes. And it was like, the hot topic of the day when that happened. So I think he was addressing that. Okay, continuing. In that spirit, let me go no farther before declaring unequivocally my love and that of my brethren for those who live with the same-sex challenge and so much complexity that goes with it. Too often the world has been unkind, in many instances crushingly cruel, to these, our brothers and sisters. Like many of you, we have spent hours with them, and we have wept and prayed and wept again in an effort to offer love and hope while keeping the gospel strong and the obedience to commandments evident in every individual life. But it will assist all of us, it will assist everyone trying to provide help in this manner if things can be kept in some proportion and balance in the process. For example, we have to be careful that love and empathy do not get interpreted as condoning and advocacy, or that orthodoxy, there's that key word, or that orthodoxy and loyalty to principle not be interpreted as unkindness or disloyalty to people. This has been a real problem because the other side wants to paint it this way, that if you love me, if you're loyal, if you're kind, you will condone it and you will be an advocate. And if you stick to your beliefs and you're loyal to your church and your doctrine, that means that you're mean. And you shouldn't think that way. In fact, your church shouldn't even exist. Or if it does exist, it needs to basically become my political party. All right, continuing. As near as I can tell, Christ never once withheld his love from anyone, but he also never once said to anyone, "Because I love you, you are exempt from keeping my commandments." This is one of my favorite quotes right here. And we all do this, I think, to one extent or another. It's not just LGBTQ plus. It's not just whatever. We're all at risk of living our own private religion and thinking that we're an exemption to the commandments. But I think sometimes people do this. They think that they have an exemption and they're allowed to, break the word of wisdom. They're allowed to do this or that because Christ understands and loves, him or her so much. Let me just read this again. Christ never once, as near as I can tell, Christ never once withheld his love from anyone, but he also never once said to anyone, because I love you, you are exempt from keeping my commandments. We are tasked with trying to strike that same sensitive, demanding balance in our lives. Musket fire? Yes, we will always need defenders of the faith, but friendly fire is a tragedy. And from time to time, the church, its leaders, and some of our colleagues within the university community have taken such fire on this campus. And sometimes it isn't friendly, wounding students and the parents of students, so many who are confused about what so much recent flag waving and parade holding on this issue means. My beloved friends, this kind of confusion and conflict ought not to be. Not here. And I think that's all I wanted to share from this talk. If you want to read the whole thing or listen to it or watch it, I'll put a link in the description box below. But what's going on with Elder Clark G. Gilbert is just a continuation of this controversy, so-called, and this war that's been going on since 2021 and before. And I'm so glad, again, that Salt Lake Tribune and Newsweek wrote these articles because it just makes me even more excited about him. I'm excited about him. I'm excited about President Oaks because he staunchly defends the family, and I think he's been prepared with his legal background to protect the church and protect the family. And then same thing with President Christopherson, who also has a legal background. I think it's no mistake that they're in these positions now because things are probably going to get, more difficult as time goes on in the lead up to the second coming. And these men are going to defend the faith. And we are entitled to faith in our own beliefs, in doctrine, and not everything has to conform to your politics. Okay, that's going to be it for this one. I'll talk to you guys later.